If there's one thing that St. Thomas Aquinas is known for today, it's his arguments for the existence of God. St. Thomas Aquinas famously opened his Summa Theologica with 5 arguments for the existence of God, and these 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas have since become some of the most popular arguments for God in the history of Christianity. Given all this, some people might be surprised to learn that there was an argument for the existence of God that was super popular in Aquinas' time, that Aquinas didn't think worked. That would be Anselm's ontological argument. Now, St. Anselm's thought was already pretty conservative and pretty well accepted by Aquinas' time. But Aquinas saw some problems with this argument that he just couldn't pass up. And in order to understand what those might be, we first have to look at what the ontological argument is. Now, Anselm starts his argument with the observation that whenever we talk about something, we need to have a definition for that thing. So if you and I are going to talk about what a dog is, and we're going to talk about dogs, we need to get our definition down first, right? Otherwise, you might be talking about cats, I might be talking about dogs, and we would not be able to have a successful conversation. Because trust me, dogs and cats are very, very different things. So, in the same way, if we're going to talk about God, and Anselm says, we know we talk about God, we're talking about God right now by talking about whether or not he exists, we need to have a definition of God. So Anselm starts by saying what all definitions of God have in common is this common feature of understanding God as the greatest possible being. If you can think of a being that which nothing greater can be thought, that being is God. So God is that being than which nothing greater can be thought, the greatest possible being. That's his definition. So the next thing Anselm does is he says that because God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, he must exist. Well, how's that? Well, we know that God must exist at least in one way. He exists in the mind, because we're able to talk about him. Okay, and that means that we need to have an idea of him in our minds. All right, so if God exists in the mind, the question now is, does he exist only in the mind, or in the mind and in reality? And Anselm says God must exist in the mind and in reality. Why is that? Well, remember we said that God is the greatest possible being, that than which nothing greater can be thought. Let me ask you something, though. If you had a being which was that than which nothing greater can be thought, which existed only in the mind and not in reality, would that really be that than which nothing greater can be thought? Would it really be the greatest possible being? Because think about it. You could always imagine a being which existed in the mind and in reality, and which was that than which nothing greater can be thought. So imagine you had that than which nothing greater can be thought A, and that than which nothing greater can be thought B. And that than which nothing greater can be thought A existed only in the mind, and that than which nothing greater can be thought B existed in the mind and in reality. Well, that than which nothing greater can be thought B would be greater than that than which nothing greater can be thought A. So that than which nothing greater can be thought would not really be that than which nothing greater can be thought. It would not be the greatest conceivable being, because that than which nothing greater can be thought B is greater than that than which nothing greater can be thought A. So, in other words, if you have a being which exists only in the mind, which is the greatest possible being, it's not actually the greatest possible being. So, to talk about that than which nothing greater can be thought A as that than which nothing greater can be thought is a contradiction in terms. Therefore, because God exists in the mind, he must also exist in reality. It's a weird one, I know. But while a lot of people, a lot of theologians throughout history have kind of found something intuitively off about this argument, no one has really been able to place their finger on exactly what might be wrong with it. But St. Thomas Aquinas thought that he knew how to do that. You see, Aquinas saw a problem in the very first premise of Anselm's argument. The idea that in order to talk about God, we need to have a complete definition of who God is. Because Aquinas argued that God is so far above us, by definition, that we cannot ever fully define what he is in this life. Maybe, he said, in the next life, when we see God face to face in the beatific vision, then we'll be able to see that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. But now, there's such a degree of separation between us and God that all our knowledge of God, all our understanding of what God is, has to be through what Aquinas called the doctrine of analogy. Aquinas agrees that we can talk about God, but he says that whenever we talk about God, we need to keep in mind that there is some radical dissimilarity between the terms we're using to describe God and how those terms actually exist in God. Because all of our terms that we use to describe things come from our experiences here on earth. But God is unlike anything in our experiences here on earth because he is infinite and everything on earth is finite. So when we say that God is good, we mean that he does have something in common with things we call good here on earth. Like when I say that my dog is a good dog, or this is a good bowl of cereal, or this is good ice cream. God does have something in common with my dog, or a bowl of cereal, or ice cream, but there's a radical dissimilarity between God and the ice cream that needs to be kept in mind. So Aquinas says that Anselm is too hasty in trying to apply this complete definition to God. God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. Because all of our definitions of God are limited, and God is not limited. And none of our definitions of God will ever fully capture his essence. So Anselm's whole idea that because we know the essence of God in our mind, he must exist in reality, is dismissed by Aquinas because Aquinas says we don't really have the essence of God in our mind. We get something of it, but we don't get the whole thing. Now, that's why Aquinas doesn't like the ontological argument. But what does that matter today? What does that tell us about the person of Thomas Aquinas? And what does this tell us, moreover, about the entire discussion of God's existence? I think today we might have a tendency as a culture to kind of dismiss the thinkers of the Middle Ages, people like Thomas Aquinas or Anselm or Augustine or Boethius or any of these guys, because of their religious commitment to Christianity. We might say that they can't really function as philosophers because of their pre-commitments to the Christian faith. And I think this instance of Aquinas rejecting the ontological argument shows that that's not the case. Aquinas is a Christian. Yes, he's a saint. He's a Catholic saint. But he's also a seeker for truth. He's a lover of wisdom. He's a philosopher. He's not going to use an any argument will do approach to Christian apologetics. He really cares about trying to make sure that the arguments he uses are true. And I think that's the case with a lot of the thinkers of the Middle Ages. In fact, I think most of them cared first and foremost about making sure the arguments they were using were true and solid. They're not going to just accept something because it happens to prove try to prove a truth of Christianity. No, they want to really make sure that what they're saying is true, because ultimately, from a Christian perspective, God is the truth. So if you want to respect God, you have to respect the truth. And that's where I think these medieval thinkers still have something to teach us today. And if you want more content like this, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel so that I can continue to do things like this. That would be awesome. Thank you. And God bless.